Open. Thank you very much for your attendance. Of course, this is a meeting of some significance, being the first meeting of the newly elected council, the first formal monthly meeting. And to those who are new around the table, thank you very much for putting your names forward and being involved, and thanks very much for your contribution so far. I think you must recognise the significance of this organisation to the people of this region, the Toowoomba region. You must also recognise the enormous task we have when we manage something like $4.5 billion worth of assets and have a budget of $548 million last year, and of course responsibility to 170,000 people through our 1,800 staff. As has been tradition in the last two terms, I once again have sought a blessing from the Christian community. And because of where we are, we normally go to St Stephen's Church, Uniting Church. My plans, partly in place, were that we would go to St Luke's Church. But in the absence of that, I'm delighted to have the Anglican Bishop for this area, Cam Venables, who has done, I think, so much for this community since he's been here, together with the work of his wife Kate through Catholic Care. So Cam, thank you very much for giving us your time today, and I seek a blessing from you at this point in time.
Thank you, Mayor Paul, and good morning, councillors. Kind of exciting to be together with you at the beginning of this 4-year journey and to be invited to pray with you and for you. I just want to reassure you that the prayers are not just now and that's it, good luck. I meet together with the heads of churches each month for breakfast and for prayer, and we pray for you then. The Christian leaders meet together every Thursday, and be assured of our prayers for you then. I also meet together with multi-faith representatives once a month through the Toowoomba Interfaith Working Group, and we pray for you then. So this is not just a once, see you in 4 years. This is a prayer for blessing. And I think drawing from the wisdom in my own tradition, I was thinking, what could I offer that you take into this work, into this 4-year journey? And I was drawn particularly to a parable that Jesus offered his disciples. Jesus told them a parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed it in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. Now, Mayor Paul may be excited to think that the kingdom of heaven is like Toowoomba, but I just urge him to let that go. And I'd encourage all of you to think of yourselves as yeast. We understand that yeast in flour makes the bread rise. And your leadership in the life of this community will make this community rise. In God's grace, that's just the way it works. For some of you, you have been councillors before, so you know the territory. For some of you, this is your first term, and what an excitement that is. Not only for you, but also for this body and for the community. New synergies, new gifts, new experience mixed in with old energies, new experience all mixed in with old experience. It's a good thing. It's a really good thing. So I'd love to pray now, praying for God's blessing as you are the leaven in the life of this community, as you help this community rise. Each of you have got portfolios. Each of you have been getting stuck into those portfolios, and you'll bring vision and energy and new life to those. Friends, let's pray. Gracious God, we give thanks for the mystery and the gift of our lives, for the gift of your love. Give thanks for this community and all who live in this region. And I give thanks for these women and men that you have called to leadership. Pray for your blessing on them, that you give them wisdom. Pray for your blessing on them, that you give them an openness to each other, that there can be true synergy. Pray for your blessing on them in the journey unfolding over the next 4 years. Pray for your blessing on them in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you.
Cam, thank you very much, and can I once again repeat, thank you very much for the work that both you and your wife Kate do in this community. You've been a great blessing to the Toowoomba region and beyond. Yeah. Thank you very much. Can I also begin by acknowledging the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Waka Waka, the Guybil, the Jarrawa people, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I can't let this occasion pass without recognising also that the Bigambul tribe does control land in the western part of this area, particularly in the area around Mulmerran where I live, where they have a headquarters. So can we also recognise those? Councillors, as you know, quite tragically, Councillor Carl lost his dad, Wayne Francis Carl, in recent weeks. I want to acknowledge the passing of Bill's father. Bill was late of Warwick, formerly of Inglewood and of course Quilpie, and he passed away peaceful in his sleep on the 8th of May 2020, aged 77 years. He leaves his beloved wife Bev. He's the father to Bill and Kim, to Peter and Kate, and to Nikki and Mark Weldon. A much-loved pop, a great poppy also to their families. He was one of 5 boys and is survived by one brother, John. We acknowledge, Councillor Carl, the sadness of this period for you, and be assured that you have been in our thoughts and our prayers during that period. I'd like to move that motion of condolence to the Carl family. Seconder, please. Councillor McDonald was the first one, but we're all agreed. Those in favour? Thank you, Bill. Your thoughts and prayers are with us. We move then to, where are we? The leave of absence. There's obviously no leave of absence today. There's no need to grant any leave of absence, I wouldn't think. So we'll move then to item 3, which is, of course, confirmation of the minutes of previous meetings. Item 3.1 is the confirmation of the minutes held on the 10th of March, of course, under the guidance of the previous council. So I would ask a mover and seconder to come from that council. Councillor Taylor, seconder Councillor McDonald. Any questions in respect to the minutes? Those in favour? Motion is carried. The post-election meeting held on the 23rd of April, the statutory meeting. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that meeting, the minutes of that meeting, please? Councillor Von Hoff and Councillor Summerfield. Any questions in respect to the accuracy of those minutes? If not, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? That motion is carried. There was a special meeting held on the 29th of April, item 3.3 on the agenda, where we considered the COVID-19 relief package, stage 1. Those minutes are with you. A mover, please, Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan. Councillor McMahon seconded that motion. Any questions? Those in favour? Motion is carried. Is there any business arising out of any of those minutes that you wish to bring forward at this point in time? If not, we'll move on to item 5, which is the presentation of petitions. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a petition with 17 signatures from the residents of Hermitage Road who live between Greenwattle and Boundary Streets, and they request that the speed limit be reduced from 80 kilometres per hour back to 60 kilometres per hour. The reason is because most people exiting their driveways do not have clear vision of the road as the terrain is hilly. Drivers cannot see the approaching vehicles even though the entranceways are clear of trees, grass or scrub until the vehicles are within 200 or 300 metres of the entrance to their properties. From another aspect, people turning into the driveways are often followed by a motorist exceeding the 80 kilometre speed limit. This means these have to start indicating that you are turning off almost a kilometre before to give the motorist behind you time to slow down. They're fearful of a fatal accident happening here because the road has become so much busier since the opening of the bypass and more trucks seem to access the road. I'd like to move that that petition be received. Thank you.
Have I a seconder? Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan. Are those in favour? The petition being received, that's carried. A second petition, Councillor O'Shea.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a petition from the supporters of the Toowoomba Community Nursery and Crow's Nest Community Nursery, drawing the attention of Toowoomba Regional Council the closing down of work done by Toowoomba-based volunteers. we petitioned the Toowoomba Regional Council to use council volunteers to propagate local native plants at the new Charlton Nursery. This will require workspace and equipment for the propagation of seeds and the planting out of seedlings, shade house space until the plants can be moved to the Crow's Nest Community Nursery, council nursery staff to supervise the watering of plants and assist in the transport of plants to the Crow's Nest Community Nursery, and the incorporating the propagation of local native plant species into the business of the Charlton Production Nursery facility. So this has a petition of 91 signatures. I move that it be received, Mr Mayor.
Councillor O'Shea has moved. Councillor McMahon has seconded that. Any questions? Those in favour of the receipt of that? It's carried. We move then to business for which the Mayor wishes to have considered at this meeting without notice, e.g. a mayoral minute. I haven't done that in 8 years, and it's not my intent to do it in the next little while. I would rather bring something, if I had something to bring forward, I'd rather bring it by way of the normal process. So it'll be a bit of a shock to the system if I do actually use the mayoral minute on any particular occasion, but maybe it could happen in the future. Item 7 is the reception of deputations and delegations by appointment. There's none of that today. We move to item 8, which is the reception and consideration of the committee reports. We move to 8.1, which is the Planning and Development Committee. Now, in terms of item 8.1, I have a matter to declare in respect to item 9 of 8.1. Is that pursuant with section 175E of the Local Government Act 2009, I would like to inform the meeting that I have a personal interest in this matter, which I recognise may be real or perceived conflict of interest, in particulars of which are as follows. The nature of the interest is I am a financial member of the applicant organisation, the Downs Club Incorporated.
That's the wrong one, that's finance.
Sorry?
That's finance.
Finance, right. Well, there you go. We'll have to retract all that.
You're back to this.
You'll get a repeat of that when we hit finance.
Back to the front page.
Back to the front page with item 9.
Yep, on the left-hand side, open the front page.
Sorry. Here. My apologies. I had the page folded over. Righto, we move to item 9 of that report, Planning and Development Report, and we have 2 conflicts of interest to report. Councillor McDonald.
Mr Mayor, let's remove item number 9, which been removed. Would we normally just remove that and vote on the rest?
Yep. We'll remove that for the first motion and we'll vote on the rest. So you've declared an interest?
So if we can remove item 9,
Yep.
We'll do the rest now.
Exactly.
we'll do the rest.
That's exactly what we're doing. We're doing the rest now.
That's right.
So all those matters will be brought forward with the exception of item 9. Any questions on the Planning and Development Report for those items other than item 9? Would someone then like to, if there's no questions, move that that report of Planning and Development be received, please? Councillor Bonhoff, Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan.
Okay.
Any questions? You're voting on the planning report with the exception of item 9. Those in favour? It's carried. If Councillor O'Shea and Councillor McDonald can declare their interest, please.
So I'll stay down here. Mr Mayor, item number 9, and councillors, which refers to confidential regional enforcement actions, April 2020, declaration of conflict of interest. Pursuant to section 175E of the Local Government Act 2009, I'd like to inform the meeting that I have a personal interest in this matter, which I recognise may be a real or perceived conflict of interest, the particulars of which are as follows. The nature of the interest is I am a resident in the same street as the subject property referred to in item 1 of the schedule of matters in progress in the Planning and Environment Court and or in the Magistrates Court enforcement actions. I'll be dealing with this declared conflict of interest by leaving the meeting while this matter is discussed and voted on.
Thank you. Councillor O'Shea.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I also wish to declare a conflict of interest pursuant to section 175E of the Local Government Act 2009. I wish to inform the meeting that I have a personal interest in this matter, which I recognise may be a real or perceived conflict of interest, the particulars of which are: the nature of this interest is myself and my spouse engaged a builder to work on a property owned by us. The builder has then engaged the company referred to in item 1 of the schedule of matters in progress in the Planning and Environment Court and/or Magistrates Court enforcement actions. I will be dealing with this declared conflict of interest by leaving the meeting while this matter is discussed and voted on.
Thank you very much. You leave the room, please. So, councillors, we're dealing with item 9 of the Planning and Development Report. Do I have a mover that be received, please? Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan. Councillor Carl has seconded that. Any questions? Those in favour? Motion is carried. They may come back in the room.
There's a second motion now.
Sorry,
Second motion. No, we just did that first, didn't we?
there's been 2 motions.
They're absent, now I've got another one, which is everything with the exception of item 1.
All right. Motion with the exception of item 1.
With the exception of item 1.
Yep.
Item 1 of item 9.
I beg your indulgence for a moment, please.
Need a motion? There it is there, Paul.
Sorry.
There it is.
Motion number 2. We've had 2 motions.
No, well, we need 3 in this section.
You need 3.
Yeah, so we've
Okay.
done the one for everything except 9.
There's
We've
2
done
motions.
the first part of 9, and there's a second part,
Second part of 9. 'cause
which
they-
is all.
Second part of 9. Okay. The third motion refers to the second part of item 9, which does not involve either of the councillors. Are you any questions in respect to that? Can be directed straight to the CEO. Any questions? So we move back then to the third resolution in respect to this, which is
On the board, Paul.
on the board behind you, refers to item 9.
I've sent an email about.
It does not include the part that Councillor O'Shea and Councillor McDonald left for. So do I have a mover? Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan and Councillor Taylor have moved. This is the other part of item 9. Any questions? Those in favour? It's carried. Right. Well, we'll move now to the water and Waste Committee, where there was not a report, but can someone please move the receipt of that? Councillor Von Hoff and Councillor Summerfield. You will get quite a while later on to have a report from the GM in each of these departments where we can discuss many things. Mover and a seconder. Those in favour? That is carried. We move then to Infrastructure Committee report, and there is one declaration. Councillor Taylor, you wish to comment on this declaration?
Thank you, Mayor. Pursuant to Section 175E of the Local Government Act 2009, I'd like to inform the meeting that I have a personal interest in this matter, which I recognise may be a real or perceived conflict of interest, the particulars of which are as follows. The nature of the interest is my father, Raymond Taylor, is a member of the Rotary Club of Toowoomba Inc., which is the organisation that has proposed the patient transfer facility for Royal Flying Doctor Service at the Toowoomba City Aerodrome. I have determined that this personal interest is not of sufficient significance that it will lead me to making a decision on this matter that is contrary to the public interest. I will best perform my responsibility of serving the overall public interest of the whole of the council's area by participating in the discussion and voting on this matter. However, I acknowledge that the remaining councillors must now determine, pursuant to section 175E(4) of the Local Government Act 2009, A, whether I have a real conflict of interest in this matter or a perceived conflict of interest in this matter, and B, if so, whether I must leave the meeting while this matter is discussed or voted on, or I may participate in the meeting in relation to this matter, including by voting on the matter.
Okay. We test the meeting.
Any questions?
Any questions for Councillor Taylor?
But I want to move a motion that Councillor Melissa Taylor, this is a matter that is in... Can I speak, Mr Mayor?
Yeah, you can. Maybe if you move the motion and then we can...
Thank you. I'd like to move the motion.
Sorry, just a moment.
The councillor needs to leave the...
Yes.
Oh, Councillor Taylor, if you could leave the meeting, please.
you.
My apologies. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I believe this is a matter of in the public interest. This matter from the Rotary Club, which is a service club, much valued, like all service clubs in our community. This is a matter that is going to increase amenity for patients coming through the Toowoomba Aerodrome with the Flying Doctors.
Yep.
And I don't believe that Councillor Melissa Taylor has any personal or conflict of interest in this matter, and I would suggest that it be appropriate that she remain in the room whilst we vote on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. A seconder, please, so we can... Councillor McDonald. Anybody wishing to make any comments on it? Councillor Taylor, I guess, has moved and has spoken. If she wishes to speak a little more on it, that's fine. Is there anyone with any other opinions in respect to it? Any other comments, regardless, that you want to make? Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I guess just some clarification, because those that may well have been watching the coverage last week will note and remember that Councillor Mr Taylor decided to leave the room. That was her decision. But on reflection and having discussions further with the CEO and Wendy, Councillor Melissa Taylor was unaware of this process at that point in time. So what we're really dealing with here is the fact of an awareness by Councillor Melissa Taylor that there is this option for all councillors if there is some confusion as to whether there could be a conflict of material personal of interest. And I think we need to use this methodology more in the future to give councillors that opportunity. And I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Carol Taylor. This point is around Councillor Mr Taylor's father being a member, not an executive member, a member of the Rotary Club, and therefore should be able to stay in the room and participate in the vote.
Thank you. Any other comments around the room? We have a mover. Councillor Shine.
Just a query, really, as to whether or not there are any precedents that anyone is aware of where a parent, as opposed to a partner or a spouse, is involved in a organisation that council has dealt with in the past.
I'm not aware, except that I have noted a more pragmatic approach being taken by the authorities, the Integrity Commissioner and the other party down there in Brisbane towards many of the complaints that have been made. Far more pragmatic approach. And look, for me personally, I would think this is a terribly long bow to ask Councillor Melissa Taylor to leave the room at a moment like this, when a father is actually just simply a member. Brian may wish to speak. Yeah.
Councillors, if a matter is an ordinary business matter, it's not a conflict of interest or a MPI. By definition of ordinary business matter, if a matter that is of interest to a person merely as, and this is if the councillor was a member of a non-profit, charitable or religious organisation involving no personal financial gain or loss to the person. In this case, if Councillor Taylor was the member, it's even one step further removed. It's her father we're talking about here. So there's clearly, I think it's an ordinary business matter, and the council has no conflict.
Any other comments around the room? You're happy with that, Councillor Shine?
Yes, I'm not suggesting, Mr Mayor, that there is any problem with Councillor Taylor participating, but I was just interested to know whether there were any precedents in relation to the specific situation of a parent being a member, which I think is a very long bow to start with. But if there were, then we might like to look at it. If not, we might set a precedent for the future.
Yep. Yeah, as I said, I think we're learning on this journey, and I think the kind of decision that I expect you're about to make here today has been part of that learning, part of the understanding a little better, and of course I'd have to praise the authorities in Brisbane for giving us a more pragmatic view of this sort of thing. Any other comments around the room? Councillor Taylor has moved a motion and it's been seconded. I'll put that motion. Those in favour? Okay, we ask Councillor Melissa Taylor to return to the room for the discussion, please. Of course, you do realise that her vote will be recorded on the record. So we can deal with the Infrastructure Committee in its entirety. Report.
Yes.
So you're happy with that?
Yep, we can deal with
So given that discussion, given that decision by council, we can deal with the Infrastructure Committee report in its entirety. So do I have a mover? Councillor Taylor. A seconder? Councillor Carl. Any discussion in respect to any matters in the Infrastructure Committee report? We'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? It is carried without dissent. We move then to item 8.4, which is the Environment and Community Committee report. Similarly, this report is here to be received, albeit there's not a whole lot of documentation around it. Councillor O'Shea has moved that report be received. Councillor McMahon has seconded that. Any discussion?
It's confidential.
Those in favour? That motion is carried without dissent. We move then to Finance and Business Strategy, which is exactly where I was about 10 minutes ago. And I need to declare in respect to item 9, consideration of applications for rate exemption for community organisations. And I declare that pursuant to section 175E of the Local Government Act 2009, I'd like to inform the meeting that I have a personal interest in this matter, which I recognise may be real or perceived conflict of interest, the particulars of which are as follows. The nature of the interest is I am a financial member of an applicant organisation, the Downs Club Incorporated. I will be dealing with the declared conflict of interest by leaving the meeting while this matter is discussed and voted on. So we might deal with that for a start. That's item 9, and I will leave the meeting.
Councillors, this is only one item, and in fact it's is it part 1 or part 2? I just can't see that on it. Because this was split into two sections, and I would imagine...
It's 9 and 10, Mr.
It's item 9 that we're on to. Item 9, councillors, we split into two sections last week
9 and
so
10.
that we are dealing with...
9 and 10. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I'll just grab this on the motion here. It is actually recommendation number 1 on item 9. Item 9, recommendation number 1, and the motion reads that the application lodged by Downs Club Incorporated under Council's rate exemption for community organisations policy 2.02 as detailed in attachment 2 not be approved. That was the council recommendation from the committee. So item 9, recommendation number 1, that's the only one we're dealing with in this case. A mover for that motion? Moved by Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan, second by Councillor O'Shea. Those in favour? Motion's carried unanimously there, Wendy. So we'll, yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Damien, the Mayor back in.
Adjourn for a couple of minutes. Just adjourn, do we need a motion to adjourn?
Well, we should, yes.
We just have a motion to adjourn for a second. We just had a technical problem. The screen's not working. Just had a motion to adjourn for a few.
Councillors, can we just have a motion to adjourn for a moment or two? There's a technical problem. And someone like to move? Councillor McDonald, Councillor Taylor. Those in favour that we adjourn? Thank you very much. in the finance and business strategy, which is before you in two parts, refers to an application lodged by Each Limited. It's before you. Do I have a mover for that motion, number 2, that's before you? Councillor MacDonald has moved. Councillor McMahon has seconded. Any discussion in respect to that particular motion? If not, I'll put it to the vote. Those in favour? That motion is carried. We then move to the third motion, which that the report of the Finance and Business Strategy Committee dated the 13th of May 2020 be received with the exception of item 9, which was dealt with separately, and the recommendations therein adopted. Do I have a mover? Finance Committee Chair, yes?
Get clarification there.
Question?
Yeah, shouldn't that be with the exception of 9.1? 9.1. Yeah. Because we voted on 9.1 while you were out of the room.
The exception of item 9.1, and each was 9.2, was it?
9. We've done 1 and 2 of 9.
Yeah. Oh, we did.
We've done the 2 bits of 9. So that resolution is in keeping with what we need. So
Apologies.
it's okay. That the report of Finance and Business Strategy Committee dated the 13th of May 2020 be received with the exception of item 9 and the recommendations therein adopted. Councillor MacDonald has moved that. Councillor Von Hoff has seconded. Any questions? Not. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Motion is carried. We then move to the Economic Development Committee report, and whilst there were no matters before Council, I simply brought up the matter of seeking a information session regarding to the economic value of sporting activities and events in this community. And secondly, there was some discussion around the recent import restrictions imposed by China. Whilst there's no formal report, they were 2 matters that were just discussed on that day. Would someone like to move that the report of the Economic Development Committee dated the 13th of May 2020 be received and that the recommendations therein adopted? Councillor Shine and Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan. Any comments? Put that to the vote. Those in favour? That motion is carried. We then move to item 9, which is the monthly performance statement as at the 30th of April. I'd like General Manager Arun Tap to come down, please, and present the monthly performance statement.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good morning, councillors. Councillors, before you is the monthly performance statement as mentioned at the 30th of April 2020. Just a couple of highlights, if I could please, to start with. You'll recall, councillors, that as part of our first stage of the stimulus package, that we've extended the due date for payment of our water rates from the 12th of May through to now to the 23rd of June. So that's been enacted as part of that month. We've also enacted the $125 rate concession for residential and rural properties. The credit card surcharge of 0.33% has also been removed through to the 30th of June. And also that support for our local suppliers by bringing forward our payment terms instead of 30 days at end of month up to 14 days has certainly had a benefit to our local community and local suppliers already, and we're seeing some of those numbers flow through. As you can see there, at the end of April, 72% of total supplier payments, which is an increase on our normal average of around 60%. Councillors, I feel as though that improvement or that benefit will continue to flow through to May and to June as that rolls out for the remainder of this financial year. So, councillors, in terms of the first stage of the economic stimulus package, we're certainly off and running. So we look forward to bringing you next month and June as well when that comes to hand. Just taking a look at the numbers then, councillors, I think that below budget is the recurring theme across all of our, how we dissect the numbers, but we'll start in the normal way with operating income. Below budget of $1.3 million, which is doesn't register in terms of a percentage just yet, given the vast size of our operating income. But a couple of highlights. As you can see there with rates and charges, below budget of $103,000. So that rate concession hasn't flowed through just yet, at least in the April figures. So we're certainly expecting to see that come through in May and June. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we come to the water rates as well, either here or in the group monthly report. Fees and charges, quite a significant below budget variance there of 2%, or $906,000. Councillors, that is primarily due to the fact that as a result of the federal government closure or announcement on closure of certain facilities, our revenue stream has simply disappeared. So we're expecting that figure, and that total figure, to be around about $4 million in terms of revenue foregone by the end of this financial year. So it's a significant hit to our profit and loss statement, but as we've previously mentioned, we've modelled that into our overall financial result. Our interest received is below budget of around about almost $590,000. I think that is absolutely reflective of a very low interest rate environment. And of course, as a measure ourselves in terms of prudent financial management, we've been avoiding placing our excess cash into term deposits, rather keeping them at call so that we have easy access to them and to those funds should we need so, which is just a response to the current environment. In terms of operating expenditure, below budget of 1%, or $2.5 million. A couple of highlights, as you can see, labour operational costs there below budget of almost $3.8 million, but you can't look at that without the materials and services line immediately below, which is above budget of almost $1 million. So what we are seeing is as a result of our response to the COVID-19 event, where we've pretty much put a hold on recruitment, whilst we understand exactly the implications for our business and our community. But where there's been requirements for essential jobs or critical jobs, we've been converting that into consultants or through agency employment for short-term requirements to ensure that critical jobs are fulfilled. So we are seeing a conversion from salary and wages into materials and services to a certain extent, but overall the net figure is still under budget as presented. Capital revenue, again, below budget, $8 million or 22% there. Largely those, the two items which contribute to that are our infrastructure charges, or the asset contribution to infrastructure charges, that is assets instead of cash, and contributed assets immediately below. They account for almost $5 million of that $8 million amount. Pretty much reflective of a change in our development industry, and perhaps General Manager Summers will touch on that later in his presentation as to what's happening there. But we're certainly seeing a slowdown in the submission or receipt and our recording of contributed assets as the year unfolds. And lastly, councillors, capital expenditure below budget, almost $33 million or 21%. And there's highlights there as to where that is across the board. This is a common story at this time of the financial year, unfortunately, that we are presenting a capital budget that is below what our budgeted figure would be for the end of the financial year, which was up around $217 million. Our estimates at this point in time, given the nature of where we all find ourselves, is around about $165 million spend by the 30th of June. So a significant change to our capital program has occurred during the course of the financial year. So councillors, they're the numbers, there's the highlights and the themes that are emerging. We'll certainly see some of these things continue into May and June. But at this point, I'm happy to take any questions or queries you may have.
Any questions for the GM? Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move over here. I really have to question how we can reach the point of these changes, these are drastic changes in figures in relation to delivery in the CapEx area. And I just wonder how we as an organisation can justify such a drastic variation in our original budget compared to our revised budget, compared to our actual budget. Significant millions of dollars difference. And I just wonder how we can justify that moving forward as we deliver next year's budget. I think we have to be realistic in what we're capable of delivering and understanding the importance of getting it as close as possible to reality.
Shall I take that as a comment?
I think, yeah, that's a comment, but probably some explanation may. I think there is a clear explanation, isn't there?
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor Summerfield. Look, I share that sentiment, and as you'd be aware that we've had this conversation on many, many occasions over the years. I think without talking out of school, as Council is aware that we're in the midst of preparing the 2021 capital budget, and the historical or demonstrable evidence that we have of how much we can spend each financial year, where capital is concerned, hovers around the $165 million component from an internal capacity point of view. So that's our starting point for the 2021 budget, which we commence presenting to you, or continue to present to you in earnest this afternoon, and as we lead into the adoption of the budget before the 30th of June this year. So I think for 2021, we're actually had taken a good hard look at the historical performance, and that's become our baseline for what the internal services of the Toowoomba Regional Council can deliver by way of capital, and that's what we're working towards for next year.
Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you. So given that the year-to-date actuals is now at 160, we've spent 127 to the end of April. Do you see us completing that 33 million by the 30th of June?
The estimates that we have at the moment is that the total capital program of the original 217 will be hovering around the $165 million mark at this stage. There's always an accelerated spend, as we're aware, in the last 2 months of the financial year, but even taking that into account, we're looking at around 165 as the performance figure, which happens to be the starting figure for the 2021 capital budget development.
Further questions?
Not
Councillor
questions.
Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Not questions, but perhaps worth looking at the fact that, particularly certainly in our portfolio, we've had flood event, which has taken some capacity off delivery, and we've also had COVID, which has social distancing in positions, I suppose, on the way our work is done. So it probably, some things may just be a timing issue, and those two events in particular need to be taken into account.
Any further questions for the GM? Councillor McDonald.
Just a comment, if I could, Mr Mayor. Normally, at this time of the fiscal year cycle, we would have a budget review 2, or a month's gone now, when we normally would have, which would have given us an opportunity as an organisation to adjust what our capital works program was and could have been at the finish of the financial year. However, with the stimulus, with the COVID response that the organisation has had to do, and coupled with the election, our special meeting in regard to some of those announcements, the opportunity to do that budget review will basically be the budget for 2020-2021. So I think I take on board Councillor Summerfield's comments, and I'm sure it will be ringing in everyone's ears this afternoon when we continue our budget discussions around the capital works program for 2020-2021, and the 165 million mark that the GM of service delivery has mentioned is certainly something that this council needs to be focused on from an internal delivery focus for 2020-21. And when we look at our COVID response, which our second response has always been spoken of being around stimulus, activating the employment of our region, and that is a discussion that will have a clear focus this afternoon as well. So I think there's a combination of things. Budget Review 2 certainly could have seen the organisation readjust what we have before us. We haven't had that opportunity, so that's why it's so important the 2020-2021 budget process is scrutinised to the level that it needs to be, as we do each year. But certainly the point that Councillor Summerfield makes is a pertinent one. As the General Manager has mentioned, it's one that we've had annually, certainly since we've been elected, Councillor Summerfield. So I think it's high time, and that's another one of those service delivery opportunities, I guess, for the organisation, brought on largely by the impact of COVID. So that's just a comment more than anything.
Councillor Carl.
Through you, Chair, General Manager Arun. Sorry, I missed the budget discussions the other day. Was there talk of, we've got a historical data to say that we spend around that 165 million in the capital works. Was there talk of, with the current constraints and the ongoing impacts of what's been happening, was there talk of how we will prioritise, or how we will be looking to prioritise capital works, not just capital works, but we're talking about that, to ensure a continuity of delivery? And I'm thinking about that in regards of stimulus for the local economy, how we prioritise, how we may actually look to engage outside work to deliver some of that with a combination of in-house. Was that sort of discussion?
Thank you, Councillor Carl. Yes, there is. And the best thing about budget, where too much budget is not enough, we'll be talking about these things again later this afternoon, but certainly the prioritisation approach that we've taken to construct a budget for next year, which not only optimises our internal workforce capacity, also seeks to achieve the more strategic objective, as mentioned by Councillor McDonald earlier on, which is to stimulate activity within the Toowoomba, the local government area. So a prioritisation approach has been taken to effectively split a capital program into an internal service delivery approach and an external service delivery approach based on certain criteria designed to meet almost different objectives, but then combine those two separate elements together to be our overall package. So that will certainly feature as part of this afternoon, and it was, I think that summarises the methodology that's been used thus far.
Thank you. Any further questions for the GM? No questions. Would someone then like to move that the monthly performance statement as presented be received, please? Councillor McDonald, a seconder, please. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Carol Taylor. Any questions at all further? Those in favour? Motion is carried. Thanks very much, Arun. We move then to the group reports and item 10.1, Planning and Development Group. Stuart.
Morning, Mr. Mayor.
Morning.
Good morning, councillors.
Stuart.
You right there?
Yes. Adjusting a chair so I can sit in it. Basically, reporting over 2 months, of course, March and April, so I'll choose a couple of items out of each month to talk about. The first one is the FRAPESA, a dreadful name, Toowoomba Regional Planning Scheme Amendment number 17, and FRAPESA stands for Flood Risk Assessment, Planning Evaluation and Scheme Amendment. I thought I'd explain that for the newer councillors around the table. Basically, the Minister has, it's at the stage now where the Minister has looked at the final draft of that amendment and has given Council permission to adopt it. So it'll be coming to the next round of Council meetings for Council to adopt. And that really will put the full stop into a really major piece of work that was done by the entire organisation in regard to flooding studies that fed into land use policies that are now in the planning scheme. A forum was held with the state architect, Malcolm Middleton, and the name of that was the Missing Middle Forum, and that talks about medium density housing around CBD areas in particular. And that was held, and 80 property owners and developers attended that particular forum. And it was a fairly successful day, actually, to say the least. That was March. April, we created a new COVID-19 business-specific page for the TRC website, along with the media folk, and that basically highlights various channels that people can use to get into state government, federal government, and even our own information sources regarding COVID-19 and various assistance packages that are out there. Council received also, interestingly, a donation of 5,000 face masks from an individual in Council's Chinese sister city, Shaoxing. The Toowoomba Region Local Recovery Group assisted in distributing the masks to regional entities in greatest need. In regard to the other parts of my report, basically they are statistical numbers, but I will just point out that Building Certification Unit in March issued 72 approvals and undertook 82 individual development inspections. However, that's fallen right away to, in April, to 30 building approvals and 66 individual inspections. The point raised by Mr. Pratep in his presentation regarding the falling away of, I guess, infrastructure charges generally, and also contributed assets, and again, the contributed assets are those assets built by the developers and that come into council's keeping. They've fallen away somewhat given there are a number of stages in different subdivision developments around the place in particular that have been put on hold, which means that basically if that happens, we're not getting plans to seal, we don't get infrastructure charges, and we also don't get those contributed assets onto our books. No doubt, as the economy starts to fire up again, that will reverse and we'll start to see more movement in those areas. Are there any questions, councillors?
Councillor Taylor, Councillor Carroll.
Not questions, Stuart. Through you, Mr Mayor, I'd like to recognise that the FRPISA is ready to be adopted, and this has been a long and protracted journey, and I'd just like to recognise publicly the work that has been done, firstly by planning and strategic planning, by transport and drainage planning, and indeed a whole of council approach to this, but also the work that has been done during that embryo time by our community who brought in, photographs of previous floods and other things like that. So it is a great achievement. Some of those people are still with our teams and some are no longer with us and have put in a tremendous amount of work. So I'd just like to put on the record thanks to the whole team from the CEO down for the work that has been done with the FRPISA. It's been a difficult journey and really very pleased to see it at this stage, and it will form part of our planning going forward. So I'd like to recognise the work done by our teams. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor, and I believe that any crisis in our lives, whether it be the one we're going through now in terms of corona, but this is a reflection on the learnings from that flood event in 2011 and following flood events, and the things that we're best off to achieve, and we're on that pathway now. Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Summers, thank you for the report. I'm particularly excited to see the work being done about inner city living and the missing middle, not Mr. Middleton. Can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of the results from the forum and where they will be now fed into something that will be meaningful?
Ooh, how long have you got?
Give me an overview.
What I might do is arrange a briefing of council in regard to that issue and also the outcomes from the forum. I guess the state government is, and particularly through Malcolm Middleton, who actually is retiring very soon from that position, if he hasn't already, is that they have a set of standard format type approaches in terms of the medium density housing that is being provided, and the state government itself through social housing and other mechanisms is looking at probably seeding some of those areas where it can into the future with medium density. But the missing middle actually means, you know, that area, that sort of housing that's not detached housing, it's not duplex housing, it tends to be 3, 4, maybe 5-storey walk-up or with lifts, and it often is rental offering, particularly the social housing that's provided and built by state government, but it can also provide for private housing very well too in various parts. And in Brisbane, it's become very popular, as it has in Melbourne and Sydney, of course, and Adelaide, not so much. But certainly it's a form of housing that's definitely missing in the market in Toowoomba. But I will arrange for a briefing to come forward to council on those matters that you wanted to discuss. Yep.
Councillor Shine.
Just on that, what was the reaction of the 80 people there, by and large, to that type of housing that you've just spoken about, that the state government is, has developed in Brisbane? What was the reaction as to its possible success up here?
The feedback I got was that it was well supported. The issue, I think the main issue that was brought up, and it's the issue that comes up quite often in Toowoomba, is that the cost of building housing or building anything in Toowoomba is the same as it is in Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sunny Coast or elsewhere. However, the price points at which you can market the product is a lot lower. So the margins tend to be smaller or slimmer in the residential products that are coming out, and that's a bit of a difficulty that we have. But that's not an excuse for not having alternative housing there. It's a matter of trying to meet the market, ensuring that things like land price in particular doesn't sort of stretch the budget for developers and then put development off. That can be a part of the problem. If in fact developers are paying too much for the land, it becomes a problem for the final price point.
Well, you mentioned how we compare with other areas. It's much the same in terms of the costs involved. How do we compare with our own council charges, infrastructure charges, with those local authority areas that you mentioned?
I'm not quite sure I picked that up, but are you saying how does the price of building compare with council?
Well, it's not so much building, but the charges that, you know, one of the components when you're selling property is...
with you. The various charges, infrastructure charges, application charges. At the end of the day, I guess it's a thimbleful of water into the Pacific. The actual charges that council charge are not major in terms of the overall costs associated with development. Specifically, our costs in terms of planning approvals, infrastructure charges, they're identical to most other councils across southeast Queensland. So our costs are not an additional impost in that regard. And in a sense, as a proportion of the overall cost of a building, it's fairly minor.
Well, it may be, but my point was it is comparable with the other.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Any other questions? Councillor Carl?
Through you, Chair. Stuart, I would have thought that the base price of land comparatively to somewhere in prime real estate at the Gold Coast or Brisbane would have been somewhat cheaper. Therefore, the margin that you speak of would be somewhat comparable because base price of land would in fact, I could be wrong. Is that a reasonable assumption?
It goes partly towards providing for a better margin, but the difficulty is the price point is considerably lower. And, yep, that's right, what people are prepared to pay for the final product. Yep.
So in effect, it's not, it'd be fair to say that that's outside of council's control.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Can I ask, you're talking about the CBD specifically here, was there any consideration giving to nodes around the major shopping centres? Because I well recall some advice that I received when we went on the infill journey about concentrating around nodes of shopping centres for that more compact living.
Yep.
Has that been given consideration?
Council, that's part of council's current strategy, and there is the ability to build at a higher density around those nodes and around major open space areas, but particularly those shopping centres that are spread around urban Toowoomba in particular. Yep.
I think that advice that was given to me when we went on that journey of infill, which spread pretty widely, was good advice, and I, certainly thought it was a good idea. Any other questions? Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan, you?
Mr Mayor,
Your hand up in the air?
putting my pencil away.
It's okay. So any other questions for the GM of Planning?
Just a clarification, you mentioned before giving us a information session on the some aspects of the missing middle forum issue, the parklands issue. Can you make that as wide as possible? Because the new councillors, speaking for myself only, I suppose, but I suspect the new councillors aren't as well informed as others on that project in its entirety. So if you could make that as wide as possible.
The missing middle?
At the priority PDA.
Oh, the PDA. Yes, of course. Yes, well, maybe that's another opportunity for a briefing. There's a fair amount of information in that, and there are modifications going on at the moment in terms of some of the aspects of that PDA. So it may well be that we bring forward a briefing on that as well for councillors. Yep.
Potentially a critical part of the CBD in due course, I would think. And of course the PDA does bring with it opportunity.
Yep. And particularly Railway Parklands, Gary Creek, that area. Yep.
Any other questions for the GM? Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Really just a comment, and maybe given the drop down from 72 to 30 approvals from month to month, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, I wonder if we could have for the next few months at least comparative data from Queensland or the nation in regard to these drop-offs. So it looks, when we talk in isolation, it looks like it may just be us, but I think we need a broader view on this as well, and then see how council can play a role in helping to stimulate that, if you like, when we talk about different measures that we've had in the past and how that's improved. And I know we've got a session tomorrow afternoon on infrastructure and how that works, so that may be an opportunity for us to discuss on measures or ways in which we can assist to grow that. But I think comparative data, not just our own, but others, mightn't be a bad move for us to look at.
Yes, we can do that. And housing certainly is a major catalyst in terms of economic development and employment across the board. And there's a limit, of course, what council can do to stimulate housing, but certainly it's a lever well and truly in the fist of the federal government and to some degree the state government.
Okay. Any other questions for the GM? Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. Just wondering, on page 4 of your report, there's some talk about discounts to application fees, etc. Could you just talk me through that as someone relatively new? And I know we don't get them out very easily, but what sort of things fall under those?
Yes. Council has a set of fees and charges, and that's the same for planning and development applications. Not every fee that's in the schedule fits comfortably with a particular development. And I was talking to Councillor Megan O'Hara yesterday about the same thing, and I used the example of poultry farms, which was a classic, where there's a set fee for poultry farm applications. Part of it's based on the floor area of the buildings, the other's based on the number of chickens that you have on the farm. Once upon a time, you'd have a poultry farm of, say, 250,000 birds, and that was a pretty large poultry farm. But now we have poultry farms of 1 million birds. Now, multiplying a figure by 1 million comes up with a huge figure, which is really unrealistic in terms of an application fee. And so the manager for DA has the ability to be able to negotiate that fee with the developer, with the applicant, and reduce the fee to what is reasonable in terms of covering costs incurred by council in dealing with that application. So that explains the figures there as to why we are reducing in some cases the fee.
I suppose through you, Chair, that it's more outside of the norm rather than special consideration.
Absolutely, yep.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, any more questions? If not, would someone like to move the Planning and Development Group report be received, please? Councillor Melissa Taylor and Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan. Those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
GM.
you, councillors.
Move then to item 10.2, Water and Waste Services Group. Damien.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning. Good morning, councillors.
Morning.
Councillors, COVID-19 is front of mind for all of us, but it's my unfortunate duty to continue to inform us that the drought has not been broken by our summer rains. Councillors, I'm not happy about that, but our dams are sitting at 33.7% combined storage levels, and that's down 1.2% on the month of April. During the month of April, we discontinued pumping from Wivenhoe on the 3rd of April, and we have brought up the amount of water that we were budgeted to ahead of schedule and under budget. I'm pleased to say that. Councillors, we've got 2 dams which are still closed to recreational activity due to the presence of blue-green algae. It is unusual for blue-green algae to be here at this time of year. Normally would have, the cooler weather normally takes it out. We're continuing to look at that and work with our colleagues in Environment Community Services when we can reopen those facilities, notwithstanding COVID restrictions. Councillors, there's a table there on the drinking water consumption. The upper portion is areas within the Toowoomba bulk supply, and the regional townships are below. Councillors, broadly, across our community is lifting the heavy weights to try and preserve our precious water security, and I thank them for that. As I go on, I go into water project services. Councillors, we've got a design and consultancy for the duplication of some of the pipe work into the Mount Kynoch water treatment plant. Just the week prior to the council elections, I had an unfortunate incident where we had a leak in that single trunk main coming from the valve house into Mount Kynoch. Whilst that is a low pressure area of the system, we hadn't anticipated that requiring immediate action. That leak has prompted us to duplicate that as a matter of urgency. Councillors, as I go on to the Perseverance main replacement at Kabala and Highfields, you can see the image there, that's atypical. We normally have two excavators sitting there, one bringing in backfill material, the other excavating and then bringing in the pipe for settlement. 5.3 kilometres will be laid by about October, and we continue to replace that trunk main. Notwithstanding, that trunk main had another burst through the month, and we repaired that. Councillors, there's some images there of the Watala primary treatment area, where we are replacing the current treatment area, the screens, the grit, the cleaning of the material that comes into the Watala wastewater treatment plant. We continue, councillors, to work on the replacement of the Perseverance pump stations at Perseverance Dam. Ergon Energy has control of the site at present, and they're working on upgrading the switchyard there from 3.3 kilovolts to 11 kilovolts, a much more contemporary electrical voltage. And we'll be taking the single aged pump, which is down in the dry well. The other previous pump had been removed some years ago in 2016. Smart meters, councillors. This is an exciting project. We've been working with the consultants on developing the probity. We've appointed probity and commercial contractors. We're working on the technical specifications for those smart meters. There has been a step change in technology, councillors, with the availability of the 4G network and the 3G network, with people transitioning to 5G networks. We do have a full meter suite fleet that is smart capable. That is, you can put a pulse head on top of it, but it's not as good as going to a fully smart meter. So due to the availability of not having to duplicate telemetry, radio signals, we're widening our assessment to actually potentially skip going from what I previously described with councillors as going from primary school meters to secondary school meters. We might skip the secondary school and go to tertiary university meters. So we'll see how that goes, councillors, and I continue to be excited about it and working with you on that project. Councillors, on the last page there, I'm quite excited about this. There is a compaction device which we have bought and have going through the commissioning phases of that out at Amara Road. Now this recycles the polystyrene that you see around all of your domestic white goods, TVs, fridges, etc., the protective material on goods which are brought in and shipped. Now that is quite it is expanded polyurethane and of other substances, and it takes up a lot of room in landfills. By the compression of this material, we can actually sell that material, and it is a well-graded product. So I'm very excited about that, councillors, and I'll be going out with Councillor Von Hoff and Councillor Summerfield on Thursday afternoon to inspect that plant. It's not in full production yet. We're awaiting some of the safety training, some of the work procedures to be done, but the machine is there and it'll be operable in a couple of weeks' time. Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Questions for the GM? Councillor Carol Taylor.
Mr Mayor, Damien, on page 7 of 10, noise testing, have we had complaints about the Wivenhoe pumps?
Yes, Councillor Taylor, we have had complaints. There are a number of residents quite close to the pump station. One in particular is complaining of the noise. The other residents do not feel the noise or the vibration. We have undertaken acoustic modelling. There is a particular hertz which is within the audible range, and it's a little bit over 70 hertz. And the way that the shedding that we've got at Wivenhoe, the shedding actually almost acts a little bit like a speaker, unfortunately. So we are looking at ways to put acoustic barriers in, potentially modify the way that the pump is set so that we can put it on a cushioned layer rather than bolted to concrete. So we're going through a range of things, councillor, to try and work with the resident. We have actually assisted the resident with some of their expenditure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Melissa Taylor and then Councillor Megan.
Through you, Chair. Damien, that recycling of the polystyrene is extraordinary and very exciting. Is that something that will be, businesses around the region will be notified about, that they can then take that waste out for them? Or is that something that you or us as an organisation will be?
Absolutely, Councillor Taylor. Thank you for the question. Yes, in the fullness of time, when we are commissioned and we are happy with the work procedures, it will be promoted. Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you.
Councillor Megan.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I was going to ask about the polystyrene thing too. What's the product that comes out of there? What you said, it's sold? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. What is the product?
It is a compressed nature of the raw material. It's a little bit like looking. You like to go to the butcher and buy sausages, but you don't always like to look into the sausage factory. The material there is a very compressed nature of the polystyrene. It comes out in a sausage, and is cuttable into lengths, and then it goes off to be recycled. It is happy to do an information session on it, councillors, at a later stage. But yes, it's a valuable material when it's in that compressed state.
Can I have a follow-up, Mr Mayor?
Yeah.
Is there plans to have polystyrene from other facilities, or have these machines in the other facilities, do you think? Or
Baby steps, but absolutely, Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan, yes.
Councillor Summerfield and then Councillor Shine.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The polystyrene machine there is actually quite exciting moving forward, and Downs Office Equipment, who we've been making aware of because they've been very concerned about how much of theirs goes to the landfill. And I've been out there and seen these trucks unloading these full loads of this stuff, which is terrible. It's lightweight, flies away easily, takes up large space in our landfills, so it's a very exciting outcome. But Damien, I just wondered if you could advise, now that pumping's completed at Wivenhoe until the 1st of July, are the pumps currently undergoing service maintenance to ensure that they're ready to go on the 1st of July?
Yes, Councillor Summerfield, this is our asset maintenance window. We had, before we started running Wivenhoe, we turned it on the 1st of April 2000, and gee, it seems so long ago, Mr Mayor, 1st of April 2019. And the operating model had been to run it for 12 hours a day, sort of 6 days a week. By running the pumps, we found that the pumps performed better. They didn't like starting and stopping. They performed better by running 24 hours, 7 days a week. And the previous thing was giving us, the previous operating protocol was giving us a very short, it's giving us a day a week to do asset maintenance, which is okay if you just need to do a bit of a grease lube and oil change on the car. But if you need to take the gearbox out, it's not enough time. By running it faster and harder and continuously, we need to work with our neighbour down there in relation to the noise and acoustics concern. But by running it continuously, it gives us a substantial asset maintenance window where we can do whatever is required.
Councillor Shine.
Thanks, Mayor. Just wondering what the cost, if you hadn't mentioned it already, I might have missed it, the cost of the polystyrene machine is, and what's the expected income from the sale of the product?
Councillor Shine, thanks for the question. I don't have the costs with me on that particular machine, and some of the sale prices may be commercial in confidence, but I'm happy to bring that to an information session. And Councillor Shine, if you are available on Thursday afternoon, and the new councillors, we'd love to show you around Amara Road and Bedford Street.
Yeah, I think Amara Road is a facility that I think has made quite a difference to our waste stream in this community. I'm very proud of the outcomes there and how much less is actually going to landfill as a result of that facility. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly a comment. I note this report is end of April, and it says that Crestbrook is closed for recreational activity on page 1. And just to fill the council in, it was great to announce on the weekend that Crestbrook was reopened to recreational activity. Certainly the tinny users and kayak fishers of Toowoomba region, who are a large group, were very happy, and some great fish caught over the weekend in Crestbrook for recreational activity. So just, I suppose, bringing that to the chamber, and congratulations to the fishers who are out there.
Thanks. Any further questions or comments for the GM? Councillor McDonald?
Just a query around this timeline for the smart meters. If I could, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the General Manager. I know you've mentioned there's some changes in probably the scope, but what does that affect? How does that affect our timeline?
Councillor McDonald, it does impact timeline because it is an opportunity to skip technology and go to a much better technology that will have, to use Councillor O'Shea's expression, an app for that, and the customers will be able to see their usage in real terms, in real time. There is a proof of concept stage that we're envisaging. It is a number of months. We were hoping for July or August that we'll have a number of meters that we'll be able to put into the ground and trial, and we'll be looking for some volunteers, be it within a specific geographic area or within areas that we actually want to test, telemetry, the systems. So it will be a little bit slower than just putting the pulse head onto the current existing meter fleet, but there is an opportunity to go to a much better technology. I'm happy to do an information session and update the councillors on this new direction.
That'd be fantastic to have a session on it, just how that may impact on our budget and our forward planning, that's all.
Okay, any further questions for the GM? If not, would someone like to move the Water and Waste Services Group report be received, please? Councillor Von Hoff and Councillor Summerfield. Those in favour? Motion is carried.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks very much, Damien. Move then to Mike. Infrastructure. The Infrastructure Services Group.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, councillors. Just highlight a few elements out of our report for the last month or so. From an innovation perspective, just noting what's happened around basically all cities, not only in Queensland but Australia, with the results of COVID-19 in regards to pedestrian crossings and that at traffic lights. So we've worked with DTMR and those sorts of things to mitigate those sort of touch points. In respect to other elements that are happening, unfortunately there was a little bit of vandalism in April, and unfortunately councillors, whether it be a bit of vandalism or theft on some of our more remote work sites, it's been fairly constant this year. Unfortunately, we put a lot of time and effort into security at sites and around the city, but we still unfortunately have levels of vandalism and theft, unfortunately. Going forward to a lot of the works that are underway, and a lot at this time of year coming closer to completion, depending on where they are in the program. But Wairima Cambodia Road, that project's progressed well, and that one will go probably into July before it's completed. As I've mentioned previously to council, we did lose over a month on many of the projects with the rain in February, but obviously the other challenges mentioned earlier today, droughts and floods and fires, and COVID-19 have been there as well. Boneville Norm Road, we've been doing a fair bit of work with DTMR across the region in varying types of works. So that's been a significant amount of rehabilitation work out there on that section of road, and those that have travelled that section of road would know how rough it used to be, and the sections that are now being completed are far better. TMR had dropped the speed limit on that section of road down to 60 kilometres an hour a couple of years ago. That's how rapid it had been. In regards to other works that we're doing with them, the Highfields Cycleway, and that's been progressing well. Road Tech are doing their section near Cawdor Road presently. We're about to start the next section there from where adjacent to the Toowoomba Christian College, and works there will be underway shortly to do that final stage of that section. There's also a section to be commenced coming in the next month or two, New England Highway at the second range crossing, to actually join in our urban spaces there with the cycleway come pathway. Other works well underway, a lot of rehab work across the whole of the region, as well as Boneville-Moolah Road, which has been the first stage of probably what will be a number of stages going forward of widening and improvement. It should be completed around about the end of this month. Black spot works, Perth and Coho Streets, the initial works there have been completed, the drainage works, and the teams are just coming back on site there now to see that work progress, the roundabout there at that intersection. And Tummerville Road Timber Bridge, which has now been closed for a couple of years with a side track adjacent. The bridge itself will be, the old timber bridge will be demolished shortly, and works commencing on ground over the next couple of months with an aim, all going well, weather permitting, that project should be, the new bridge should be in place by Christmas, all going well. So that just gives a bit of an idea of what's been happening the last month or so. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Taylor? Councillor Carroll?
I have a few. Mr Brady, thank you for your report. For our officers, I'm seeing here in the road safety with the Fatality Free Friday, which is usually May the 29th, and wondering why it has to be a digital Fatality Free Friday when we could really have a release here, keeping social distancing, of course, but it seems somehow that road safety has fallen off the radar, both federally, state and in local government. None of us are achieving our objectives that we've actually set down for that, and it's just a little bit disappointing that I think that we could do that. We could highlight that in some way, and indeed I believe we should, and we have just a couple of weeks to go before that. I'd like to highlight the Wairima-Cambodia Road. What a great job. That's been 30 years in the making, and if councillors aren't aware of that, the state-controlled road, which is the Toowoomba-Carrara Road that goes through there, goes underneath the railway line at Cambodia, so heavies cannot access that road, and they've been going up this road for many years, and it'll be to a standard where the neighbours won't be so impacted, and it'll be a good route for those areas. And also the Bowenville-Moolah Road for the new councillors. That's a route that carries a lot of stock feedlots out there, cattle and pigs, and a lot of product going in and product coming out, of course. And the road safety elements of that road are really quite stark when you consider that school buses are travelling that road with heavies along there. So that's the first stage of that, and I hope it was identified in Roads Alliance's first and last mile pilot project. I can't remember the date, but it was in the early 2000s, I believe, about 2007, wasn't it, Mr Brady? Six, I think. Something like that. Anyway, it's good to see that council's been pushing that, and we've made a start on that. So thank you. But my question about the digital Fatality Free Friday, I think, you know, with all due respect, road safety should be front of mind for all of us, and I understand the restrictions around things with the COVID-19 implications, but you know, we really need to be doing something to have it on the television and the radio to have it front of mind for people. Otherwise, I think, you know, we will miss the momentum that can come from that. And we haven't quite yet achieved a fatality-free Friday in the 12 years I've been sitting around this table, but there's always hope that maybe there can be one, and maybe it's this one. So I wonder why we can't do something in that space.
Thanks very much.
I'm happy to take that on board, Councillor Taylor. I think when the report was written, obviously, when the restrictions and things would be lifted, there was uncertainty, and obviously we're not the main driver behind Fatality Free Friday. We're one of the key stakeholders and partners to it. So I will take that request back and see if there can be now, with the lifting of restrictions to a certain degree, some level of local gathering, and as part of that, so we'll take that back. I'll take that on notice. And
follow up there, Mr Mayor, that actual initiative was instigated by a local that used to live here, and it's turned into a nationwide initiative. So I think anything that keeps road safety front of mind, I think, is worth it. And I recognise we're not the instigators of that, but perhaps we can just encourage that something be done in a visual manner. Thank you.
Of course, Fridays, by their very nature, are the peak period for Councillor O'Shea, then Councillor Summerfield.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Mr Brady's probably answered my question, so I'll just quickly reframe it as a comment, I guess. I concur with Councillor Carol Taylor's comments. It's obviously a very significant date and a very significant initiative that we've sort of had. So if there is works behind, if we can do something of some magnitude, I think it is very important to be at the forefront of mind. But that aside, what was going to be planned? Were we going to have some form of digital event on the 29th still, or what are we doing for fatality free?
Yeah, in essence, I'll get the details sent out to councillors, if that's okay through you, Mr Mayor.
Yep.
And what was planned, and I'll also take on board the request of council to look at the opportunity to see if there's some level of local gathering with the emergency services.
Thank you, Mr Brady. Thank you.
Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So through you to Mike, the 2018 DRFA rain event, can you advise firstly when those works will finally be completed? But also, could you elaborate on the 2020 rain event on what the damages are and what sort of dollars are involved in that, please?
Yeah, so in respect to the 18 event, works are currently underway and we're working on those. That'll be finished, works will be completed in the first half of the next financial year. So this side of Christmas could be, I think the bulk of the works will actually be probably completed by the end of Q1, but there may be a few things into the second quarter, depending on sort of the actual activities that are involved. In respect to the second event, the 2020 February event, we're still doing a lot of assessment work of the damage across the region. There's been a lot of work that we've made safe. We've, in emergent works alone, it's in the order of about 1.5 million that we've spent already. And look, it has been very much a guesstimating what the quantum of the damage across the region, but we're thinking in the order of the 20 to 30 million could be the order of magnitude. And I just emphasise there that is very much a guesstimate, because we haven't by any means finished the assessment, so it could be a little less, it could be a little more. So that's yet to be worked through in its entirety.
Any further questions? Councillor Shine.
Thank you. Under project services, I noticed the Russell Streetscape Refresh project is entering the detailed design stage. Any idea of what is the estimated time for completion of the entire project there?
Yeah. Look, Councillor Shine, it will be dependent on where we go with Council's capital budget over the next today and over the coming weeks. It is planned presently, designed to be completed this calendar year, with commencement in or about January, February next year, as in 2021, and then that would go through to October, November 2021 for completion. That is the, how can I say, the current plan. That said, we will be very dependent on the, it's a multi-year project, so it will be dependent on where we end up from a capital perspective.
Any further questions? Can I just ask, there was to be an engagement with a fair bit of new technology along some of our main thoroughfares with new light bulbs, potentially Wi-Fi, potentially security cameras. Has there been much of an advance in that area? I've kind of lost track of it in the last 12 months or so.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, a lot of work's been done on council-owned infrastructure. So a lot of our lighting in the CBD now is all LED. So that's all been upgraded through various council programs over the last couple of years. That in some cases has seen additional camera mounts being put in where appropriate, and also a lot of sensors are also on those poles. So we can do, it's opening up an opportunity for further innovation and development of ideas from you know, what we can pick up going forward. Obviously it'll be pending future investment in that sort of space.
Any further questions? Not, would someone like to move that the Infrastructure Services Group report be received? Councillor Carroll's moved that and Councillor Alyssa has seconded that. Team Taylor, thank you very much. Those in favour? That's carried.
Thank you, councillors.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks very much. Item 10.4, which is the Environment and Community Services Group report. Nick.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good morning, councillors. Councillors, as I always begin, it gives me great pleasure to present to you the Group Monthly Report for Environment and Community Services for the last 2 months of March and April. We did touch on it last week at the committee meeting, talking about statistics around our e-library and e-resources from the libraries, and it's the first point in the group report, and I just wanted to highlight that again. We had been experiencing great growth in our online resources already, but that has been somewhat fast-tracked with the onset of COVID-19 and the necessitated closure of our library, so that's been very well taken up by our community, that particular service. Councillors, of particular interest to yourselves and the community also, through Parks and Recreation Services on the next page, is preparations for our prescribed fuel reduction burns over the coming months during the prescribed burning season. So you can see there are 7 sites which are planned for fuel reduction burns, and the team are, as we speak, busily preparing those blocks for burning, and we'll see that commence very shortly and continue throughout winter, provided the weather holds up for us the way it currently is. So that's looking hopeful for us this season. Councillors, I also wanted to point out property services with the current close down of aquatic season. A lot of our pools having some maintenance undertaken to them, so there's a list there of pools that you can see that we've been working on. We've been separating filtration of toddlers' pools from main pools. We've been replacing seals and expansion joints at various pools throughout the region, so it's a good opportunity for us to get that done. The season was extended a little bit longer for us this year because of the earlier close down resulting from COVID-19 requirements. Councillors, there are 3 highlights. There's a few others in the reports full of highlights, as you'd expect, but I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Councillor Carroll and then Councillor Rebecca.
To Mr Hauser, when are we planning to open the Milne Bay indoor heated pool?
So the Milne Bay indoor heated pool will remain closed during the stage 1 easing of restrictions, which limits people to 10 attendees. We're looking at whether it's viable for us to do that at the next stage when it can open to 20 attendees, but it's a maximum of 20 attendees. So we're currently working through what that means and what that looks like for us, because there are a number of operational requirements for us in doing that. We can't open change rooms and all sorts of
If I
things.
could have a follow-up, the hydro pool and the therapy pools, that's of grave concern to me that, and I realise we can't do it now, but a lot of people are relying on that for their mobility, actually, to keep them mobile. So I guess that we probably need to keep that in mind.
Yes.
There's only one of only two in our region.
That's correct. Thanks, Councillor Tay. Yes, we're well aware of that, so that's part of our considerations in making those recommendations.
Councillor Von Hoff.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through you, thanks, Mr Hauser, for that. I'm particularly heartened by your points here about the preparations for the fuel reduction burning in the coming months. And my question is, how are we going with the plans to communicate that this will be happening to the residents in those areas? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Those plans are developing. There's a draft media release in preparation now, so like to get that out as soon as possible so that we can let the community know what to expect. It'll need to be followed up with more prescribed information, if I can use that phrase, around each of the burns, but we'd like to get something out early to at least communicate at this high level and then communicate more directly with those impacted.
Thank you.
Further questions? Councillor O'Shea.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Same topic, Mr Hauser, just around the prescribed burns. I guess obviously we understand this has been an area of contention, obviously within our community. So we've got the list there of obviously what's planned for. So I guess my first question about this is what we do. This is what has been happening in the past. This is not a new thing. This is not something that's just come on board all of a sudden. This is the work that the TRC undertakes on an annual basis. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
So the second, I just wanted to highlight the point as well, obviously, as we know at the moment, for a lot of the groups that are out there and obviously that are very active in this space, of course, that we do have, we put out a release earlier this week about round one of the Queensland Bushfires Flexible Funding Grants. So if you want to talk about that, I guess we're looking at any of the groups that are out there to work with TRC so we can maximise the benefit that we can get in terms of what funding is available for this first round.
Thanks for the question. Councillor O'Shea, thanks for highlighting it. Yes, there's an opportunity for grant funding there, and those grant applications are often looked upon favourably by the assessors when there is a collaboration of council and other community groups. So we'd encourage anybody with any ideas. We're not the owners of all the good ideas out there, so good ideas come forward, and council would happily partner with groups to progress those good ideas and offer support, and indeed council itself might be the applicant for some of those programs.
Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. General Manager Nick. Just wondering, with the Carney Spring ovals, they're being top-dressed at present in the down season. That's great. I just wanted the report set ongoing subsidence issues. Could you tell me what the ongoing problem at Carney Springs is?
So thanks, Councillor McMahon. Carney Springs sports fields are built on an old landfill, and so there's lots of movement there over time, and so it's ongoing maintenance is required to keep those fields at a safe level for play to avoid injury for players.
No, thank you. I suppose, if I may, Mr Mayor, as a follow-up, now that the restrictions are easing and we've opened some facilities, I suppose the phone is ringing quite often regarding dog walking parks, libraries and swimming pools. And just from certainly a environment and community perspective, the dog walking parks especially, it's very hard to police the 10 people rule when the dogs go up and say hi to each other. Usually the owners follow. And are we working on those reopenings, Nick?
Yeah, we definitely are for all of those facilities and that are closed, and changes, like you mentioned, to dog off-leash parks. So we're working through those, and we'll follow that up with media as we're able to bed down our decisions around when those facilities can open and how they'll open and how they'll operate, because there's quite a lot to work through there, but we're getting close.
Councillor Shine.
Yes, I was just wondering why the Charles and Motti Rogers Park at Highfields is included, it being a good way away from the escarpment, firstly, but I think I recall the sensitivity of many people at Highfields in relation to interference with the fauna and flora associated with that park. Can you explain why it is in that in the program?
Sure, thanks Councillor Shine. Charles and Moddy Rogers Park in Highfields is in the middle of a residential area and is a source of fire threat. So, you know, our management of that reserve is respectful of, you know, the environmental needs of the park. It would have been burnt in the past, and indeed some of the vegetation needs that to regenerate and maintain itself. So we'll work through that and do it. It would be a slow, cool burn, and fulfills a couple of purposes. Number one, reduces the fuel loads there and reduces risk, but also has an ecological need for the ongoing maintenance of the park.
Councillor Cole.
Glad you raised that, Councillor Shine. In the 30 years I've been in Highfields, I haven't seen it burnt yet, Mr GM. I would predict there might be some objections, the very reasons Councillor Shine has raised. Personally witnessed some wildlife there that hasn't been there for some years returned. I don't think a burn would be the most important thing is that some time back I recall, and in fact the beginning of last term, we were to come up with a management plan for that. I stand to be corrected, but I'm of the belief that we haven't yet finalised that. The Friends of the Frankie Scrub and Charles Moddy Reserve were waiting to see how they could be part of that, and that was contingent upon council developing that plan. My understanding is we haven't developed that plan, and to look at a burn-off methodology to manage it is somewhat drastic when we could be managing it with willing participants and volunteers from the community to actually try and address some of that risk. Has that been completed? Is it up to date? Have we enrolled the willing participants of those communities that I mentioned?
Thanks for the question. I'll need to follow up on that one, Councillor Carl. I do recall the desire to develop that plan. I couldn't comment as to the status of that off the top of my head. I'd like to check with the officers involved and get back to you if that's okay. Take on board your comments and concerns around you know, the proposed prescribed burn, and again, I'd like to take some advice of our expert staff in that area to inform my comments. Thanks.
I just think it's a little bit of a drastic measure. If, you know, we've had all this time to actually try and manage, and that by my lay person's understand of manage is those willing volunteers were there to help us, or were doing it prior to the situation arising where it was under threat, the reserve, from being part of it being bulldozed. But prior to that, the volunteers were managing pests there, weeds and the like. So I think a sustained effort might actually see a less drastic measure of a cool burn. Proximity to the cultural centre, I'd suggest there'll be some problems with that too.
Happy to take you.
I would really hope that we could investigate the options other than burning for a start, and engaging the community that has been waiting for a long time.
Happy to take that feedback on board and come back to you with some more information.
Councillor Cole, last year I was going from various park to park walking, and I was quite surprised at the amount of wrapping papers and all that sort of thing in that particular area, and it certainly would benefit greatly from having a group of people who cared for it. And I'd hope that we can engage with somebody to do that in the not too distant future, because it was pretty close to the middle of Highfields, and obviously people went to particular takeaway shops and bought what they wanted and left the remainder that was not edible in the park. And during the bushfire crisis, I received a number of, I think it was about 2 or 3 phone calls from people in that area concerned about the inflammable material in that park. So maybe, I think there would be some material in there that ought to be either just crunched up to nothing or something like that if fire wasn't an option.
Yeah, you raise a good point, and without stereotyping any sector of the community, it would be beneficial, in my opinion, for council not only just to engage those environmental groups that are interested in caring for that reserve, but also engaging with the local school in proximity, which I witnessed numbers of people wandering through, and individuals littering, leaving some of those wrappings that you talk about, Mr Chair. I'd like us to see council engage with this neighbouring school community, with the principal, to see how we might work together to preserve that piece of reserve as a legacy for future communities, not just for older people, but for younger people. And in fact, I think there's a distinct advantage of having a reserve so close to a school, in that opportunities could be explored around environmental topics or part of the learnings for students and the benefit of environmental asset. Something that we could investigate perhaps and collaborate with the school community. There may even be a willingness from some students to step forward and actually assist in the care and maintenance of that piece of precious land that was gifted to council many years ago.
Thanks, Councillor Carl. Any further, Councillor Shine?
Thank you, Mayor. I am aware of the scarcity of cricket ovals in Toowoomba, and I note with concern the removal of the wicket at Captain Cook Oval number 2 to make way for one of the many football codes to be on it. And I ask, is there any consideration being given to the construction or the making available a cricket wicket in some alternate oval?
Thanks, Councillor Shine. Look, if I can take that question on notice, I'd need to consult with the Parks and Recreation branch around that. Of course, there's plans for development of new sporting parks at Charlton, and Highfields has come online and has a couple of additional cricket wickets that weren't there before that park opened. I do note that before the removal of that cricket wicket, there was consultation with both cricket and soccer. So one would assume that there was concurrence around the removal before that happened. I haven't heard any complaints from cricket, and I can't see any suggestion from councillors that you've been contacted either. So I think if they were upset, they would have let us know, but I will check with Parks around some more detailed information.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the GM? Councillor McDonald?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just following up on that, GM is quite correct. There was quite considerate consultation actually between all parties there, and the rise of opportunity at Highfields presented itself nicely. So it's been a very good conversation actually around that. My question is more, and through you, Mr Mayor, through to Nick, you might be able to elaborate further on that. The 21 community organisations that have received event support grants that have either cancelled or postponed, and we go through a process here of applications for grants. They go through a pre-approval and then come to council. Just wondering what process there is for those groups to return the money. I know they've got 12 months in which to have the event or acquit it, but what process, or has there been instances where they've returned money, and if you know the quantum of numbers perhaps of people who have said that we can't run it out of those 21 and return the money?
Thanks for the question, Councillor McDonald. I don't know the quantum of where groups are in terms of not being able to press ahead, but I do know that we are working with those groups, those that, so for event grants, the funds are paid upfront and in advance to assist with the conduct of the event. So groups that have been paid their funds and are unable to conduct their event because of COVID-19 have a couple of options. Number one is cancel the event and pay the money back to council, and some have taken up that option and that's what they're doing, and they'll look to conduct the event in the future and apply for grants. Or if they look to postpone or reschedule the event, we're working with them to accommodate and facilitate that, in which case they keep the funds and put it towards the event at a postponed or later date. So that's the process that we're working through. I understand it's working well at this point in time. There is another category of events that haven't had the money paid to them yet. So they were approved through the last round of events grants. The money hadn't been paid when COVID hit, and so we're working with them around what that looks like for them going forward. But we're trying to, where we can, honour that commitment and assist those groups to conduct the event again at another time.
Any further questions?
I need to be excused, thank you.
Okay. Can I just ask you about the number of dingo scalps that are coming in? And I do so because from Cecil Plains right through the area where I come from, right around, even around the escarpment, I'm hearing lots of stories about a real build-up in the dingo population. Just become a little personal, we're seeing packs of up to 18 and 20 dingoes at times. I think whatever we're doing in terms of reducing numbers, I feel the real problem is with the state government and their neglect of Crown land. But in saying that, it's having quite an impact, and particularly during the drought, it was pretty serious. Just wondering if there's any consideration being given, wondering about the numbers coming in, and secondly, I'm just wondering if there's any chance that something can be done to incentivise it. We personally pay for trappers and dog callers to remove troublesome dogs, so I'll keep that out of it. But in terms of the broader aspect of it, is there any consideration being given?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I've not seen a report in recent times about the number of scalps that have been presented, but again, I can follow that one up. We do offer and conduct our baiting service, and that's occurred. It's occurring right now. Our latest baiting service for wild dog and fox baiting. So that's a tool that's available to landholders. Of course, the control of pests is on land is the responsibility of the landowner, and council does what it can to assist in that regard through our baiting program and through the offering of a bounty for wild dog scalps. But like I said, I haven't seen a report in recent times to suggest how many scalps are being presented, but that should be very easy for me to put my hands on.
Okay. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, I'd like to support you in that. I've heard from the people along the escarpment, actually around the Budgie area, that the dogs have increased. And when you say it is a responsibility of the landowner, dingoes can travel 15 k's and they have a track that goes around, as we all know that. But I guess that I support the Mayor in that, because not only is it a double whammy, we've got drought, we had pigs also, I believe, are increasing as well.
Yeah. Yep. And if I can, Mr Mayor, our pest management officers are very active in trying to work with syndicates of neighbours and landholders to take that multi-pronged approach rather than leaving it up to one single person to try and deal with it. It's much more effective if everybody works together. Yes.
Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. Just if I could add to that question, if we're following up on the amount of scalps, could there be some inclusion in how well this program is received by landowners and how many people take advantage of the baiting program, the 1080 that we offer? Nick, that would be great. Thank you.
No problem.
I think that the baiting programs aren't necessarily as successful as they used to be.
No.
I really don't. I think that maybe a new approach, but anyhow, as you say, up to the landowners, and they might have to find a better method. Any other questions?
Can I just follow up with that? I think there's been a huge increase in uptake in the baiting. I think there has been a huge increase in uptake in the baiting, certainly since I've been elected to council in 2012. A lot of work's been done. a lot of work with neighbours, encouraging neighbours to be involved, and I think there's been a big increase across our region, which has been most helpful.
I spoke of the effectiveness of the program, and I can assure you that it's not having any great impact on the numbers that are coming through. Be assured. Any other questions? Not, would someone like to move the receipt of the Environment and Community Services Group report, please? Councillor Carl and Councillor O'Shea, those in favour? That's carried. Move now to Finance and Business Strategy Group report. Back again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, good afternoon, councillors. Before you is the monthly group report for the Finance and Business Strategy Group, and if I may, just step through some highlights. As has been mentioned on many occasions already this morning, these are very extraordinary times, and they have served as the impetus for many changes to our service delivery arrangements. Some of those arrangements are completely new, and others are some significant changes. One such example highlighted in the report is our accelerated use of videography. Councillors, you'd be aware that looking around at the equipment that surrounds this room, that we've been using videography services to monitor our council meetings, the swearing-in ceremony, the very first meeting of council, and the special meeting for the relief package, all which is an accelerated effort on our ICT branch as well as our stakeholder engagement communication team to present council information to a wider audience in a far more accessible way. The feedback is very good, and I know that there's a number of staff that are watching this meeting and getting a much clearer understanding of the decision-making processes that occur within our organisation, and also an understanding of how their work contributes very much to this chamber and the contribution to the decision-making that then happens. So a line of sight for our staff as to their efforts and how it all rolls through to the council process is a very good thing from an engagement point of view. In the report there are examples of the videos that are being produced, and we're doing, have been done so on a weekly basis to support those messages to the community. And as I mentioned before, these are very, very positive feedback that we've received. Councillors, with regard to, on the subject of information, communication and technology, and we had an example earlier this morning, the situation or the environment has been very challenging for our teams, and as previously mentioned, we've been supporting remote users up to over 500 that have been working from home or from other remote locations. But having done so, you can see the performance statistics there in the table are still pretty good in terms of resolution of faults, for example, are still within our target range, and even those other measures are only outside, really reasonably just outside that target range at this stage of the financial year or for the month of March. People and Organisational Development Branch, one of the highlights I think worthy of note is you can see that we would normally have a permanent staff turnover rate of around 10%. Last month it was around 8.5, which is pretty low. The industry average is anywhere between 10 and 15%. But have a look at what happened in April. It took a dive down to 1.44%. So obviously we're not recruiting, as I mentioned earlier on, or there's been a slowdown in our recruitment as a response to the COVID-19 event. But staff are not leaving us either. So the churn rate has decreased markedly, which I thought was interesting, but I suspect that is reflective of the broader local government industry as well. From our customer service performance, just a couple of statistics there. Again, a reasonably good news story, I would think. You'll see there that there's a number of measures that are not applicable for the month, and that is identifying the fact that we've closed certain counter transactions across the region and instead been supporting our customers through online services. But when customers do need to speak to somebody face-to-face, we're doing it by appointment. On the online and the phone services measures, we're still meeting those target ranges. So green ticks there down on the right-hand side. And of particular note is our customer satisfaction, or telephone customer satisfaction rate, a target of 90%, and it's almost 94% there. So they're pleasing to see that we're able to provide these services under different arrangements and still meet the expectations of our community. Having said that, we're also in the midst of developing our reopening plan, which actually has been finalised. It's going through the approval process at the moment. So seeing a staged reopening of our services for customer service, and we're also doing that for libraries at the moment. So we'll be bringing some more details to you about that very shortly. So announcements will be made, I suspect, within the coming days as to how we will reopen these things and over what time frame. Under financial services, councillors, as I mentioned earlier on in the performance statement, there are two things I'd like to cover here, that is water rates and support for our local suppliers. As you can see in the graph, councillors, in terms of when we issued our water rates and the subsequent cash flow, i.e. people or the community paying their water rates, is pretty much matching what has happened in the past. So we haven't seen that divergence, if you like, from as a result of the pandemic. We'll see what happens over the remaining 2 months. However, we anticipated to receive up to $36 million in water rates for that quarter. Right now, as of today, that figure is $30 million. So the community is meeting its obligations as far as water rates is concerned, which is something that we were all very interested to see how that panned out. So I thought you might find that interesting. The second point I'd like to make is, as mentioned, is with regard to the support for local suppliers. Over my page, a couple of graphs identifying that up to 72% of our spend for the month of April went to local suppliers. So that's been hovering around about anywhere between 50 and 60% in months gone by. And like I said, we've only just really enacted the first range of economic stimulus as resolved by you last month. So I suspect that we'll see even greater levels over the months of May and June, but and hopefully that will be the case. So we'll bring that to you as soon as it's available as well. So very important things. And with regard to finance, whilst we're looking after these types of arrangements and these activities, none of the regulatory or compliance activities have slowed in any way, shape or form. So you can see in the report that the Queensland Audit Office is still conducting its examination of our internal control environment when we must meet those expectations, as well as meeting our expectations to complete our draft financial statements and our financial statements within certain timeframes. So those expectations haven't been eased in any way, shape or form. So we're pretty much flat chat right across the board, as is everybody across the organisation. Councillors, I might leave it there and take any particular questions or queries you might have in the monthly report.
Any questions for the GM? Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan.
Mayor, are you able to tell me, Mr GM, I see there that the customer service, the workforce, you said that 56% is working from home. Mm-hmm. So of the organisation in general, roughly how many people are still working from home, and what's the plan to transition back to, or what if transitioning back?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. So we've got around about 500 people currently working from home or from a remote location, and that's the ICT support that's been built to make that possible. The return to work or return to your normal work location is actually going through a couple of phases. Firstly, we're taking the view that our support for the community and services to the community is number one priority, but as I've previously mentioned, we seem to be ticking those boxes even under our current arrangements, which gives rise to a number of questions and considerations that we are now debating as a team. and that is how many of those that are currently working from home can continue to work under arrangements like that, not necessarily exactly like they currently are, but how many positions within the organisation can be permanently in a work from home or work from remote location arrangement. And that's the challenge we've thrown out to the People and Organisational Development branch, to understand that as part of a much broader workforce management strategy. So I suspect there's a number of great things that have been brought to light as part of the COVID-19 response, and I say that from a work arrangement point of view, certainly not belittling the challenges that it's provided to a great many people. But how can we learn from the way in which we've delivered these services, and what do we want to keep into the future, where we can demonstrate to the community that it is a more effective and efficient expenditure of public money. And that's what we're doing currently. So our return to work, or our normal workforce arrangements, is being in a staged process because we want to examine whether or not we can keep some of the good things that we've identified and address some of the more challenging things that have also arisen during that time frame.
Any further questions? Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. Just through you, just out of interest, just wondering, on the bottom of page 7 of your report, there's looks like a PPE vending machine. I'm just wondering what the inclusion is and how that works, and is it a cost, and is it available to?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so this is one of an innovative practice that was introduced in a trial period several months ago, which was to provide a mechanism for staff to access PPE, protective personal equipment, in a more efficient, quicker, easier way than has currently been the case. Before, you had to go through stores, and there were some administrative arrangements around that. So putting it into a vending machine that uses your council ID card to be able to access the room, and then to be able to identify what you need and have access to it, all the while we're recording in a systemised approach what's being used, the frequency in which this equipment is being used, so we understand what the replenishment rates need to be, is giving us a greater level of oversight. So it really is to help staff, make it more efficient, give them more time, less administration time and more time doing the jobs that they are paid to do primarily. So thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor McDonald and Councillor O'Hara.
Just a comment and a question, I guess, at the end of that, in regard to the local, if you just go up the top of that page there, when the local supply has been once again supported today with the decision, the recommendation last week, and ratifying that today, endorsing it with the up to 50,000 local 10% plus 2% regional, and the 50 to 200,000 5% plus 2% regional, which should give rise to even greater over the top of the 60%. I guess the question is, and we've done this very well over a number of years, in connecting business with council and giving them the insights on how business can do business with council. I just wonder, given what we're doing here, maybe there's an opportunity for us education-wise, and whether that's delivered online or through other groups, but we've largely focused in the Toowoomba area. And I think we've got an opportunity now, given the additional weighting of 2% price for regional centres, that perhaps an online version of something, given COVID and what have you, maybe that's something we could look at through you, Mr Mayor, through the GM, as part of the education package that coexist with this.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Yes, I think you're right. We're in the past that we've used a face-to-face approach to conducting business sector information sessions, so that how to do business with council, understand exactly what the processes are, what our constraints and challenges are, and why we ask for certain bits of information, etc. So I think with the changes to the to the procurement policy, as you quite rightly point out, has been ratified today. It'd be opportune for us to see if we can't put an online education or awareness session together and publish that out through our channels that we've mentioned at the outset of this report.
Thanks, Ron.
Yep. Happy to do that.
Any further questions? Councillor O'Hara.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Mr Petrab, I was wondering about the work care contribution. Can you just explain to me what it means? So this reduction reflects the hard work undertaken by council to manage injured workers. What does that mean?
So, councillors, in summary, our premiums or our cost for work cover have decreased simply because of the way in which we've been managing our return to work processes and activities during the course of the financial year. So we're rewarded through savings into the cost for running that scheme or being part of that scheme by demonstrating that we have documented processes in place, a methodology and a support program to get people back to work as quickly as possible in a safe and meaningful way. So the People and Organisational Development Branch have actually been or spearheaded that type of efficiency gain for a number of years, and whilst there's about $100,000, I think, in the report for this year. In the past, that we've made savings of up to $200,000 or $300,000 per year. So the cumulative total of efficiency gain because of their efforts is very significant for this council. So it's certainly a highlight.
Are there any further questions? Thanks very much, Ron. Would someone like to move that report be received, please? Councillor McDonald and Councillor Shine. Those in favour? That's carried. We move then to other matters. Matters for which notice has been given. And we move to item 11.1. Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move that a report to consider the establishment of an Environmental Advisory Committee be presented at a future Planning and Development Committee meeting.
Moved by Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan. Seconder.
Mr Mayor, just
Can I get a seconder before we go into debate? Councillor Carl. Councillor Taylor, a comment?
I wasn't wanting to go into debate. I was just wanting to actually ask through you to Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan if she would amend that to being an environmental working committee, as we do have with the ag and logistics. I think a committee, my reasoning being a committee such as this should not just be drawn from the general populace, it should be appointed people that have the knowledge and the expertise that we're looking for. And that's the difference.
Yep. Thank you. I'm sorry I used the word debate. Didn't actually mean to. I realised you were asking a question, but anyhow, we've clarified that.
Mr Mayor,
comfortable to do that?
Explain, Councillor Carroll-Taylor, what it is that you're suggesting, proposing?
A working group as opposed to an advisory, because with an advisory group through the Mayor, we usually advertise for anyone in the community who's interested to join that group. I don't think in a situation like this, as with the ag and logistics, I think that if we're going to have such a group, that we should actually appoint people with the relevant knowledge and history in that area, rather than just have someone who's got an opinion perhaps just like me or something. So I think that it's a group that would need a certain amount of expertise and knowledge, and perhaps recognition for that in that space. Whereas an advisory committee, you just ask for anyone who's interested.
Well, Councillor Carroll-Taylor, I sort of probably don't agree with you there. I think that is what we're looking for. Some experts, some people from different groups, but definitely members of the community.
Well, excuse me, Mr Mayor, ag and logistics people are from the community as well. They just have certain qualifications, I guess, to have that knowledge.
I guess that's part of the workshop when we look at who the members might be, but I mean, I would hate to preclude people just because they're just members of the community.
Well, that's up to you, I guess, but in the workshop, we'll have that. Yeah, I couldn't support just anyone in this space. If you look, anyway, we'll come to that later. I can't support just...
Councillor Sommerfield and Councillor Carl.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think the terms of reference identifies how many people are allowed on that committee, and the applications are then screened to see who, so that you've got a diverse range. But look, my only concern with this is in relation to in the reason for motion, and it's that final sentence. And I think, to me, that highlights that there's a lack of understanding of what an advisory committee does to council, and that is that they put forward recommendations to council for due consideration at each step along the way. And so to advise and assist in the preparation of the new Toowoomba Region Planning Scheme and Climate Action Strategy, I find that is not appropriate. They could advise or make recommendations in relation to the planning scheme, but as for assisting in the preparation of it, that is not the role of an advisory group. And the Climate Action Strategy, I don't know what that is.
Okay. Councillor Carl.
Mr Mayor, personally I don't see a lot of difference between what Councillor Taylor is talking about and an advisory group, because council gets to actually make the final determination about the constituency or the membership of that advisory group. That's my first point. But having some discussion with Councillor Megan and the General Manager and senior staff in the Planning and Development section, was felt a need for this sector of the community, whether they be professionally qualified or members of the community with an interest, to be able to be readily engaged. And it's very difficult for staff to know who to go out and engage with directly as part of inclusion of stakeholders in preparation for a new planning scheme, because that's a mammoth task. And for those of us who've been around the table before, will know that the planning scheme review, a start of a new one, not a rehash of the old one, will take most of this term to complete. So there will be many touch points, as with other sectors of the community that are important stakeholders in helping formulate what I call a community document, because it's there for everyone's benefit. So there was a sense of real importance to ensure this sector of the community, and there are broad and varied interests in this sector of the community, both qualified and lay people with an interest. So I think I'm quite comfortable to support Councillor Megan's proposal on that basis, because we will have a huge body of work to move through, and that's just the planning scheme. This would be very beneficial moving forward in the way we look at doing our business as a council, considering the service delivery review stuff. There may be some advice or input that people with expertise in these fields would actually help council in the future. So I don't think there's such a play on the words of assist and advise. I think it's, advice is assistance. I mean, look at other advisory groups, and there are a myriad of them that we have that assist council along the way to advice given. Council's discretion whether we accept it or not in the formulation of a policy, i.e. a huge one, a planning document that I refer to, planning scheme, or any such policy. I'm quite comfortable to actually explore this. Let's have the workshop. We can flesh a lot of this stuff out, and council then can step forward comfortably, knowing that we are importantly engaging, which I think we've been underdone, quite honestly, in this sector in times past, from assisting our staff to be able to readily tap into these fields of expertise.
Okay. Councillor McMahon and then Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And certainly in my only new appointment, I'm not overly familiar with the difference between a working group and an advisory group. Certainly I'm not opposed to the idea But one of the concerns that I'd raised already with Councillor O'Hara was the idea that if we were going to have this kind of committee, I'd like people with certain qualifications who are qualified to advise more than just the average members of the community. And so certainly I agree with Councillor Cara-Taylor's idea that if it's a working group, if that therefore means certain qualifications need to be gained to be on that group, I'd support that change. Thank you.
And I just wonder if, when we have this discussion, we go through this process, that we can work that particular part of it out. Councillor McDonald and then Councillor O'Shea.
Yeah, we're probably almost moving to the next stage of this process, actually, to work on terms of reference. So I just wonder if, Wendy, can you just go down the page a little bit? I saw something highlighted there that brought my attention. The Councillors' Workshop terms of reference for the proposed Environmental Advisory Committee prior to its establishment being presented to a future Planning and Development Committee. So that would then cover off, in my mind, if the mover and seconder are comfortable with that, that would then cover off on all the discussions that we are having. I think we're probably one step in front of ourselves here, and all the discussions have been spot on, but we need a deeper look at what those terms of reference are. So if the mover and seconder are happy with that, that will then cover off for all this discussion to shift to that conversation.
Can I ask the mover and seconder if they're happy with that?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Okay. That's that clarified. Councillor O'Shea.
Next, same point, to be honest, just in terms of, I think today's around, do we have an intent to want to, which would cover off on a lot of the things that we've covered, so I had the same point.
Councillor Taylor.
Mayor, through you, that actually says advisory committee, where I believe it should be left until our discussions to decide what it is. I think it should be environmental advice committee or something to that effect, and we, the council, after a workshop, can then decide if and what it should be.
Yep.
I believe.
Yeah, look, for me personally, even with the word advisory in there, I think that when we sit down and have that meeting, I would hope that the most appropriate outcome will come out of this council.
And that's,
it may not be advisory. It may.
For you, that's what I'm concerned about. You know, I think that for it to be worthwhile, and it can be and it should be, because it takes capacity to have these things. And yes, we do want an interface with our community on this, but at the end of the day, we do need to be making sure that we have the right people there. It is only advice, yes, but it'd be a wasted effort if we didn't have something that we could really consider, I suppose.
Well, are the majority of people happy that when we sit down and talk about this, that we fathom that particular aspect of it out? Yeah. I hear what Councillor Taylor's saying, and I know that, this is when we have a resolution like this, it puts us in a particular spot. But I would think that given the discussion we're likely to have and the terms of reference that should come to us for that discussion, we can surely work something out at that point in time. That's my view. But I just...
Mr Mayor, my concern is that are we locking ourselves into calling it an Environmental Advisory Committee by approving this motion today? Because I think what we should have in something as important as this, with the planning schemes Councillor Carl has mentioned and other challenges that we have, and we also have LGAQ working for us in that space, is that the appropriate thing, or should we just be considering in what form we should go forward after a workshop is presented to us? And we've had that input of what we have LGAQ working for us, what that looks like and where we should be going.
Yeah, I hear what you say, but I'll revert back to what I said in the hope that we can get some direction out of that meeting as to exactly which way we should take it. Councillor Megan, you first, and then Councillor McDonald.
Well, Mr Mayor, I was just wanting to speak to the motion, if I could, maybe to just explain to the other councillors my reasoning behind the calling for this establishment of this committee. Is that possible?
Yep.
Yep. So, Mr Mayor, some people might ask why we need an advisory committee at local government level. Well, Mr Mayor, I think that I hear people in our community begging all levels of government to sit up and take care of our precious environment. People in our community want to have a say about how we protect our green spaces, our parks, our community gardens, our water catchment areas, our agricultural land. They want input into our long-term strategic policies, and they want action plans on the environment, including but not exclusive to climate change, energy efficiency, waste reduction, recycling, protection from bushfires, sustainable development and biodiversity. Mr Mayor, as you know, our environment plays a critical part to our physical and mental health and well-being. Not only that, it's a critical driver of our economy. We pride ourselves on being known as the Garden City. Not only is our community demanding we place a value on our environment, our lenders and insurers are demanding it too. We are increasingly required to demonstrate what we are doing to mitigate against more frequent and harmful weather events. It will cost us a lot more in the long run to do nothing now. So, Mr Mayor, you'll often hear the catch cry that council should stick to its knitting, roads, rates and rubbish, that we are not elected to do this. But I would argue this is very much our knitting. To my mind, there are many reasons to put an advisory committee in place, and the most important ones are as follows. It's council's responsibility as a leader, it's council's policy commitment, the community expects it, and most importantly, the local government deserves it. I urge my colleagues to support the establishment of this Environmental Advisory Committee.
Okay. Councillor McDonald?
Yeah, Mr Mayor, no, look, I think we've jumped from debating all sorts of things at the moment, but that's really just the Speaker of the motion. I was wondering if there was any concern, and I'm happy with it, but if there was any concern, maybe just add the words Environmental Advisory Committee, open brackets, or something similar, close brackets, cover off all conversations in regard to what it may look like, with the intent of being an environmental focus.
Yeah, with a strong environmental focus. Are you comfortable with that?
Yes, Mr.
Okay. That's right. If you're prepared...
I was just saying that...
Wendy can get that up and we can have a look at that. Establish an environmental advisory or something similar. Or a similar purpose, something similar sounds a bit boring, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Or a similar purposed committee.
We know what it means.
Similar purpose.
Focused?
Focused committee. Focused would be good, yeah.
Sorry to throw that out of order, but I just...
Doesn't worry me. Now, are there any further discussion around that? I think that opens the door for a whole range of things that will come out of that discussion. And you know, an outcome that will suit the majority. Councillor Von Hoff?
Thanks, Mr Chair. I agree. I think with this inclusion, once we go into those conversations, then we can resolve those issues about advisory, assist, the climate action strategy and so forth.
Yep. Okay, any further discussion? If not, we have a mover, we have a seconder. Moved by Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan, seconded by Councillor Carl. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? It's carried without dissent. We move then to item 12, any other business that council determines by resolution. For the new councillors, if you wish to bring something to be discussed here in general business, you first of all, by resolution, seek the permission of council to bring that forward. And is there anyone wishing to bring any matters forward by resolution, given that it's we have another appointment at 1 o'clock and it's getting a bit late, but I certainly would accept something if anyone wants to bring it forward. If not, thank you very much for your attendance. For the new councillors, you've been through your very first monthly meeting of the Toowoomba Regional Council. Thank you very much for your input. Thank everyone for their input. And I think we all understand, as we move through these items, the responsibilities that are very clearly on your shoulders, my shoulders, shoulders of the general managers and the staff. This is a big organisation and something we ought to be very, very proud, in fact, to be part of. So thanks a lot. I'll declare the meeting closed.